Right now, your heart is feeding every organ in your body. But here's the terrifying part. The heart can't feed itself the same way. It depends on just a few tiny arteries, and when one suddenly closes, a race against time begins. Right now, without your permission or your attention, a pump the size of your fist is contracting roughly once every second, moving 5 liters of blood through 60,000 miles of vessels. You have never once had to think about this. That is the design. That is the danger. Because the heart is a muscle, and like any muscle, it needs fuel. Not the blood it pumps outward to the rest of your body. That blood never touches the heart's own tissue. Instead, the heart feeds itself through a separate private plumbing system. The coronary arteries, 3 main vessels wrapped around the organ like a crown, which is exactly where the name comes from. Corona, crown. And it is inside this crown that almost every heart attack in human history has begun. Here is the part your intuition gets wrong. You probably picture a heart attack as blood simply running out, a pipe drying up from the far end. That is not what happens. What happens is an explosion. For years, sometimes decades, a soft fatty deposit called plaque builds quietly along the inner wall of a coronary artery. It does not block the vessel outright. In fact, for most of its existence, this plaque is stable, a fragile little dome sitting under a thin, fibrous cap, like a blister of biology waiting under pressure. You feel nothing. You have no idea it's there. This is what makes heart disease the most successful silent killer in the developed world. It does its most important work in total darkness. Then, for reasons that can be as simple as physical exertion, an emotional shock, or nothing identifiable at all, that fibrous cap tears. This is the moment everything changes. The instant the cap ruptures, the inside of the plaque, a soup of lipids and inflammatory cells your body has never exposed to blood before, comes into direct contact with your bloodstream. Your body reacts exactly as it would to any open wound. It clots. Platelets rush to the site and begin stacking on top of each other within seconds. And a thrombus, a fresh blood clot, begins to grow directly inside the artery. In a vessel that might have been 3 or 4 millimeters wide to begin with, a clot can fully occlude the passage in under a minute. Downstream of that clot, everything goes dark. The heart muscle fed by that artery, a region called the myocardium, is suddenly cut off from oxygen. Cardiac cells are some of the most oxygen-hungry cells in the entire body, because unlike skin or bone, they never stop working. They cannot afford to rest, ever, not for one beat, and now they have seconds, not minutes, before their normal chemistry collapses. This is where a French physiologist named Claude Bernard becomes relevant, though almost no one credits him for it. In the 1850s, working in cramped Parisian laboratories, Bernard was among the first to describe what he called the milieu intérieur, the internal environment your cells depend on to survive, a chemical balance so precise that even small deviations become lethal. He couldn't have known it at the time, but he was describing exactly what happens inside a starving heart cell, an internal environment thrown into total chemical chaos. The instant oxygen delivery stops. Without oxygen, your heart cells cannot run their normal method of energy production, a process called aerobic respiration, which efficiently converts glucose into usable energy using oxygen as the final ingredient. Cut the oxygen, and the cell is forced into anaerobic metabolism, a cruder, faster, far less efficient backup system that produces a fraction of the energy and, critically, a toxic byproduct, lactic acid. That acid begins accumulating in the starved tissue almost immediately, and it doesn't just sit there quietly. It changes the local chemistry so severely that nearby nerve fibers, sensory neurons that normally sit dormant, begin firing. This is the true origin point of the pain you would eventually feel. Not a direct signal of heart, but a chemical alarm of wrong environment, translated by your nervous system into the sensation of pressure and weight. And that pressure will not stay where it starts. It is about to travel to places that make no biological sense until you understand exactly why. To understand why heart attack pain shows up in your arm, your jaw, your back, anywhere but where the actual damage is occurring, you have to understand a wiring flaw baked into the architecture of your nervous system itself, one that has nothing to do with heart attacks specifically and everything to do with how your spinal cord was built before you were even born. During early embryonic development, your heart and the skin of your left arm, shoulder, and jaw share overlapping nerve pathways feeding into the same segments of your spinal cord. Sensory information from internal organs is carried by thin, sparse nerve fibers that your brain almost never has to interpret directly, because organ pain is rare and usually diffuse. Sensory information from your skin, on the other hand, arrives constantly in high resolution through a dense, well-mapped network your brain reads effortlessly every second without conscious thought. When your heart begins sending a flood of pain signals up the spinal cord, those signals converge on the exact same neurons already responsible for your arm and jaw. Your brain, which is fundamentally a prediction engine built on probability and past experience, makes a statistical judgment. It has almost no practice interpreting raw cardiac pain. It has decades of practice interpreting arm and jaw pain. So it defaults to the interpretation it knows, projecting the sensation outward onto the skin instead of correctly identifying its true internal origin. This phenomenon is called referred pain, and it is not a malfunction, it is your brain doing exactly what it was built to do, just in a context evolution never specifically prepared it for. This is also precisely why heart attacks are so frequently misdiagnosed by the people experiencing them. The signal has been geographically scrambled by design. At the same moment this is happening, an entirely separate system is being triggered. The sympathetic nervous system, your body's ancient fight or flight mechanism. Specialized receptors called baroreceptors and chemoreceptors, stationed in your major blood vessels, detect the drop in oxygen and blood pressure caused by the failing heart muscle, and they send an emergency signal straight to a cluster of neurons at the base of your brain. In response, your adrenal glands dump a surge of adrenaline and noradrenaline directly into your bloodstream. This is the exact same chemical flood a human ancestor would have experienced encountering a predator, and your body cannot tell the difference between an external threat and an internal one. Your heart rate spikes, trying tragically to pump even harder despite the blockage. Blood vessels in your skin constrict, causing the cold, clammy sweat so many heart attack survivors describe. Blood flow is redirected away from your digestive system, which is why nausea and the powerful sensation of impending doom a symptom cardiologists take unusually seriously so frequently accompany a real cardiac event. Your body is running the identical emergency protocol it would use for a lion. It has no separate subroutine for your own artery is closing. This is also why heart attacks disproportionately go unrecognized in women. Research consistently shows that female heart attack presentations skew more heavily toward these secondary adrenaline-driven symptoms, fatigue, nausea, shortness of breath, and less toward the textbook crushing chest pain. Most people, including many clinicians historically, were trained to look for first. The wiring is identical. The dominant symptom expression simply varies, and for decades medicine underestimated that variance because it built its diagnostic model almost entirely around male patients. Inside the heart itself, things are deteriorating on a strict, unforgiving timeline. Deprived tissue doesn't just sit quietly waiting to be rescued. Starting within the first few minutes, the affected muscle cells begin losing the ability to maintain their own internal electrical charge, a property called membrane potential that every living cell depends on to function. As that charge destabilizes across dying tissue, it can trigger chaotic, unsynchronized electrical activity, the heart's normal, coordinated squeeze, degrading into a disorganized quiver called ventricular fibrillation. This is the mechanism behind sudden cardiac arrest, and it can occur within minutes of the original blockage, sometimes before a person even fully registers they're having a heart attack at all. Every second that passes now is a second that determines exactly how much of this muscle survives. Heart muscle does not regenerate. This single fact is the reason cardiologists built their entire treatment philosophy around a phrase you may have heard without understanding its full weight. Time is muscle. Unlike your skin, your liver, or even bone, cardiac muscle cells, cardiomyocytes, do not meaningfully divide and replace themselves after early childhood. Whatever tissue dies during a heart attack is, for all practical purposes, gone permanently, replaced eventually not by new muscle, but by inelastic scar tissue that cannot contract and cannot conduct electricity properly. This is why the speed of intervention after symptoms begin doesn't just affect survival, it determines the entire future capacity of a person's heart for the rest of their life. The scientific understanding of exactly how the heart's electrical system works, the very system now failing during this attack, was hard-won across more than a century of obsessive, occasionally reckless research. In the late 1800s, a British physiologist named Augustus Waller became the first person to record the electrical activity of a human heartbeat, using his own dog Jimmy as a live conductor by standing him in buckets of saline solution wired to a primitive electrometer. Waller believed the discovery had almost no practical medical application. He was wrong, but understandably so, it would take another physiologist, Willem Einthoven, refining Waller's crude signal into the modern electrocardiogram, the ECG, before doctors gained a tool that could actually watch a heart attack unfold in real time, wave by wave, from outside the body. Einthoven would spend years hand-calculating corrections for his galvanometer's mechanical drift, alone, obsessively, because he understood that a few millimeters of error on the printout could mean the difference between correctly reading a dying heart and missing it entirely. That obsessive precision is the same precision emergency medicine now uses against the clock. You are racing every second symptoms go unrecognized. If a blocked artery is reopened within the first 60 to 90 minutes after symptom onset, a window cardiologists call the golden hour. Though it is often shorter, the majority of the threatened muscle can frequently be saved, restored to nearly full function once blood flow returns. Wait several hours instead, and the damage becomes largely fixed, the affected region of the heart permanently replaced by non-functional scar. This is not a gradual slope. It is closer to a cliff, and the single largest variable determining which side of that cliff a person ends up on is not the hospital, not the surgeon, not the technology. It is how quickly the person experiencing the symptoms or someone standing near them correctly recognizes what is happening and calls for help. This is why the symptom list matters so much more than most people treat it. Crushing or squeezing pressure in the center of the chest, pain radiating into the left arm, the jaw, or the back, cold sweat with no clear cause, nausea, shortness of breath, a sudden, disproportionate wave of fatigue, or a specific, hard-to-describe sense of impending doom. None of these symptoms require certainty to act on. Emergency medicine is built around exactly this uncertainty. You are not required to diagnose yourself correctly, only to take the possibility seriously enough to call. The recommended action, if it is available to you and you are not allergic, is to chew, not swallow, a standard adult aspirin while waiting for emergency responders, because chewing dramatically speeds its absorption into the bloodstream, where it works within minutes to reduce the clot's ability to grow further, buying precious time for the muscle still fighting to survive. Then you wait for help, ideally sitting or lying down, conserving the very oxygen supply your heart is currently struggling to secure for itself. The heart does not fail silently. It floods the body with information from the very first moment something goes wrong. Chemical alarms, misrouted pain, a nervous system screaming in the wrong dialect. The only true failure is a species that, despite mapping every electrical signal this organ produces, still spends its final warning minutes deciding whether the pain in its arm is worth mentioning to anyone at all.